Hey everyone, Tornado Soup here. So today we're talking about. All right, well, it's a little, okay. It's very weird, and it won't make a lot of sense right now because frankly, it sounds pretty stupid. But looking into it a little more, it's not as stupid. So look, even after all my research for this episode, I haven't found a 100% conclusive answer, but I still find it interesting to think about because it's one of those conversations that only comic books fans could have. Anyway, let's dive into this and try to figure out whether or not Thanagarians, like Hawkman, lay eggs. The original Hawkman, Carter Hall, first appeared in Flash Comics #1 way back in 1941. However, due to the fact that this version is not technically a Thanagarian, and is actually just the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian prince, which in itself is a whole other can of worms that I don't want to get into right now, we're not looking at him. Instead, we're jumping ahead to the Silver Age variation, Cador Hall, first appearing in The Brave and the Bold, issue number 34, in 1961. This version is a Thanagarian police officer who comes to Earth along with his wife and partner Shira, aka Hawkgirl, to hunt down a criminal from their home world. So, just a little side note, I was reading this issue of Brave and the Bold while researching this video, and I found it interesting that the villain, while escaping Hawkman and Hawkgirl by turning into a fish, because it's not like birds eat fish, and not important, he ends up getting swept away and finding himself in an underground continent. It doesn't really have any bearing on the plot, and he's only there for like a page or two, yet the whole thing's still in there. It took Jules Verne like an entire book to cover this concept, and I don't know, I found it kind of weird, but also kind of cool, and just one of those really out there comic booky concepts that don't really make any sense and don't really fit in, but it's just how comics work, and I love it. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. So I decided the best way to determine whether or not a Thanagarian would lay eggs would be to examine their physiology. And I know that comes off as sounding kind of creepy. Just let it go. Let me examine these fictional bird people in peace. So, right off the bat, it's established that they are decidedly not bird-like, at least not genetically. They just have wings made out of nth metal, material that bends several laws of physics and science, and this is how they fly. Well, that seems like it, right? The search for the Thanagarian eggs done after like 2 pages of a 6-year-old book. But Hawkman can never be that simple. It's probably why I'll never do another Hawkman episode again, because he is one hard character to research. Before I go any further, I think we need to go further into who Hawkman is. He's not as simple as, say, Superman, or Batman, or Spider-Man, or Wonder Woman, or literally any other comic book character. Superman's origin is easy to remember. Last son of a dying world, kindly Kansas farmers. Superpowers from the sun, megalomaniacal bad guy, who's also bald. Becomes a reporter, yada 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 yada. Hawkman, on the other hand... So to fully understand Hawkman, we have to go way back to World War II. Following Superman's introduction in Action Comics #1 in 1938, there was a huge demand for superhero comics, for pretty obvious reasons. Pretty much every publisher started pumping out character after character. The original Hawkman was one of these. This one, Carter Hall, had his fair share of adventures, appearing in All-Star Comics alongside the Justice Society of America, as well as having solo adventures in Flash Comics, which, not like Flash Comics as in comics starring Flash, but the series was called Flash Comics. It also starred Flash, but anyway, following the end of World War II, demand for superhero comics began to decline, and the comics industry began to shift focus more towards different genres, like westerns, crime, romance, etc. Another aside, this has even less to do with the actual video, but the romance genre of comics was actually pioneered by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, the 2 guys who created Captain America. Again, totally not relevant, just really interesting, and I thought I'd throw that in there. Anyway, because of this decline, Hawkman, along with most of DC's other heroes, besides Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, kind of just disappeared. This changed, though, in the mid-50s when DC editor-in-chief Julius Schwartz began an effort to streamline and revive some of DC's older characters. The first was Flash, in the form of Barry Allen, then Green Lantern, then the Atom. Wait, what does this have to do with Hawkman, I hear you asking? Well, first of all, please stop invading my mind, it's very rude. Second, this was just warming up, because things are about to get really, really weird, really, really fast. Especially if you don't know much about Hawkman already. And yes, we have to go through all of this just to figure out if the guy lays eggs. Anyway, a new Hawkman eventually came. We already talked about him, Kater Hall. Remember? A few minutes ago in the video. You can just, tap the left side of your phone screen. If you're watching on the phone, go back. You could be watching the computer, then you just scroll back. You know how YouTube works. Never mind. So, he was the first Thanagarian guy. So now we've got to have kind of gone in a circle. Sorry, I stuttered there. I'm too far in the recording to start over, though. So anyway, we've kind of gone in a circle. But anyway, the editors and the writers, mostly Gardner Fox, realized that they had all the old versions of the character still lying around, but had kind of written it so that they weren't usable. Like the new Flash, Barry Allen had been inspired to become the Flash after reading the fictional adventures of Jay Garrick, the original Flash. Clearly, these two can't exist in the same universe, right? Alright, just bear with me, because it is about to get weird. This is the last warning, okay? Last warning. Alright. And so, in Flash number 123, the multiverse was born. Barry and Jay met, and suddenly the door opened to a slew of new crossover ideas. But eventually, DC found all these universes to be cumbersome to new readers, and decided to thin out the herd with Crisis on Infinite Earths, a maxi series released from 1985. Comics weren't around in 1885. I mean, like, political cartoons, which are technically comics. Oh, I'm going way too off script this episode. Anyway, so, Crisis on Infinite Earths, released in 1985 to 1986, yada yada yada. In that series, written by Marv Wolfman and drawn by George Perez, the multiverse was whittled down to just one Earth, and all the others were combined into it. Jay Garrick was now from the same Earth as Barry Allen. Simple as that, even if that's not too simple. Except, in the case of Hawkman, the two versions were so radically different that it would be difficult for the two to merge. And yet they couldn't be two different characters entirely. And that's where the whole thing starts to kind of go downhill. Hawkman has been retconned and rebooted more times than pretty much any other character in comics. And with all the talk of aliens and reincarnation, it's kind of impossible to track down all the different explanations of what Thanagarians are exactly. So while the Silver Age Kater Hall isn't a bird like he would seem to be, the New 52 version of Hawkman comes from a Thanagar where the inhabitants actually did have wings once, but lost them due to some genetic deformity, only for Kater to recreate them with nth metal once again. Now, I haven't read every issue starring Hawkman. With a character that's been around for as long as this, that would be nearly impossible to do. But I've gone through some of the appearances of the different iterations, and there's nothing. It appears like Thanagarians don't have natural wings in pretty much any adaptation or iteration. Even when they're not added into the armor with nth metal or something, the wings are somehow genetically modified into Thanagarian DNA, like in the Hawk World series from late 80s, early 90s. And if genetics were manipulated like that, then there was no clue that the birthing process would be changed at all. And clearly Thanagarians haven't evolved to fully take advantage of laying eggs anyway. They don't have natural beaks, which means that the little baby hawk people would have to smash their little baby hawk people faces against the inside of the eggshells. So there's that. But is that it? Are we done here? Must we finally give in and accept that Thanagarians just don't lay eggs? Well, Hawkman still gets a little more complicated than that. In the most recent Justice League series, penned primarily by Scott Snyder, an arc featured Jon Stewart, Martian Manhunter, and Kendra Saunders visiting Thanagar Prime. A bunch of stuff happens there. They run into Chiara Hall, who is supposed to be the same person as Kendra Saunders, but clearly isn't, and there's also the Savage Hawkman from the New 52, despite the fact that, you know what, that doesn't matter. All we're focusing on right now is a single page. In fact, just a single panel. While on the planet in Justice League number 15 from 2019, Martian Manhunter mentions that the Thanagarians created a supposedly impenetrable vault over the site of an ancient temple to their goddess Ar-Rayan. Jean tells the others the vaults were supposed to be representative of Ar-Rayan's nest. And if the goddess has a nest, then she probably lays eggs, right? I mean, that's the primary purpose of a nest for birds. At first, when I found this, I figured it was similar to how ancient civilizations, like Greece, related the creation of the earth to a mother giving birth. It could be a way for them to see a simplified version of the very complicated cosmic origins of their world based on their understanding of how life works. But since this is comics, Ar-Rayan is a real person, and most likely a different species, being a god. So this kind of just brings us back to square one. Maybe the Thanagarians just worship a bird. I mean, this would explain their obsession with obtaining wings of their own. This means, well, I think we just have to give up. Thanagarians just don't lay eggs. I mean, there are other workarounds, but they kind of feel like cop-outs. You could say that since there are some mammals that lay eggs on Earth, then hypothetically any alien species could, even if they're not bird-like. Or since Hawkman goes through a cycle of reincarnation, maybe one time he was actually reincarnated as a bird, and laid an egg like that. But basically, from what I could find, Thanagarians just don't lay eggs. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but it doesn't look like I can. I searched far and wide, but this is what I've got.